I never thought I'd come back here, not like this. I stood on the cracked sidewalk of Maple Street, suitcase in one hand, the other gripping a rusted mailbox that still had my father's name etched in peeling gold letters, E. Whitmore. This small Pennsylvania town was where I was born, where I had my first kiss, where I buried my parents. It was also the place I fled from a decade ago, thinking I'd outgrown it. I was wrong. Coming back wasn't part of the plan. I was supposed to be on a tenure track at Boston University. I was 32 with 2 published books and a reputation as a rising sociologist. But life doesn't always move in straight lines. 1 cancelled research grant, 1 department shakeup, and 1 ruined relationship later, I found myself at rock bottom, driving 9 hours to the last place I ever wanted to call home again. They say time softens edges. But when I walked past the high school, the diner, the same corner store where I used to steal peppermint sticks, it felt like the whole town had been cryogenically frozen. Same peeling paint on the town hall, same church bells that rang on Sundays and funerals. Nothing had changed, and somehow everything had. The old Whitmore house was still there, a little sagging now, like it had exhaled and never inhaled again. It smelled of dust and forgotten memories. My Aunt Helen had kept the lights on after my parents died, but she passed 3 years ago. The house had been empty since, until now. I didn't plan to stay long, just long enough to catch my breath, maybe pick up some adjunct teaching work at the community college, fix up the place, sell it, move on. I told myself this was temporary, just a pit stop on the way back to who I used to be. That lie held for about 3 weeks. In the beginning, I tried to blend in. Coffee at Finch's Cafe every morning, volunteering at the library, attending Sunday services. The town was still insular. People noticed everything but said nothing to your face. I caught the glances, the nods, the occasional, "You're Eleanor and Martin's girl, aren't you?" I smiled, nodded, and kept moving. Then I ran into her. Claire Manning, the girl who had once been my best friend, the one I stayed up all night with reading Margaret Atwood and planning our lives outside this town. We hadn't spoken since college, but there she was, sitting in the mayor's office, wearing a tailored suit and a smirk that hadn't aged a day. "Caroline Whitmore," she said like she was tasting something bitter. "I heard you were back." The conversation was cordial on the surface. She offered me a smile, tight and polite. We caught up. She was now chief legal counsel for the mayor, married to a state senator, lived on Cedar Lane. I pretended to be impressed. She pretended to care. We both knew we were lying. Still, that encounter ignited something. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't bitterness. It was a chill. There was something in the way she looked at me. Not like a friend, not even like an old classmate, but like a problem. That was the first time I felt it. The invisible weight of someone else's agenda tightening around my throat. Days later, I received a letter taped to my door. It wasn't from the city, no return address, just a single line typed in 14-point Times New Roman. "You don't belong here anymore." I laughed it off, threw it in the trash. But 2 mornings later, I found the front gate wide open. Someone had shattered the kitchen window. Nothing was stolen, just glass and silence. That's when I knew this wasn't just a pit stop. This was a trap, and I just walked right into it. I woke up on the floor of my kitchen with blood in my mouth and gravel embedded in my palms. The sun hadn't risen yet. The back door was swinging open in the wind, groaning on rusted hinges. I'd been dragged. My legs ached, my ribs felt bruised, and I could taste copper every time I tried to swallow. The last thing I remembered was stepping outside to check on the garden, and then nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the memory of something heavy slamming into the back of my head. They didn't take anything, not the laptop on my dining table, not the envelope of bills I hadn't gotten around to paying. They didn't even open drawers. Whoever it was, they weren't here to rob me. They were here to send a message. And the message was received. I didn't call the police. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was because the man who now wore the badge in this town was Sheriff Dean Harlow, a man who had once cornered me at a party in high school and whispered things I'd spent years trying to forget. He was also Claire's cousin. Instead, I cleaned myself up, duct taped the broken window, poured hydrogen peroxide on the cuts along my knees, and I waited. Waited to see if it would happen again. It didn't take long. That week, the school rescinded my adjunct offer. No explanation, just a voicemail from the department chair. We're going in a different direction. I hadn't even started. I'd passed every background check. I had a PhD. But suddenly the door was closed. My car was vandalized next. All 4 tires slashed. Liar! Keyed into the driver's side in sharp, angry strokes. Then the whispers started. I'd walk into the post office and people would stop talking. I'd wave to an old neighbor and they'd pretend not to see me. A waitress at Finch's Cafe dropped a cup of coffee in my lap and whispered, "Freak," under her breath as she cleaned it up. It wasn't paranoia, it was coordinated, designed, surgical, and the rumors, they were cruel. That I'd slept with a married professor to get my doctorate, that I'd been fired from Boston for academic fraud, that I had a breakdown and was now squatting in a house I didn't own. But the worst came 2 weeks later. The sheriff showed up at my door with a search warrant. "There's been a complaint," he said, with that same greasy smirk he wore in high school. Anonymous tip, something about illegal prescription drugs? I let him in. What choice did I have? They tore the place apart, turned over the couch cushions, emptied every cabinet, pulled the floorboards in the laundry room. They found nothing. Of course they didn't, but they didn't need to. 3 hours later, my name was on the front page of the local paper. Former academic under investigation for drug possession. No charges, no arrest. Just a photo they pulled from my old Facebook account, eyes half closed, mouth open mid-laugh. The kind of picture that made you look unstable, irresponsible. The damage was done. I tried to reach out to people, old friends, classmates, former colleagues. No one answered. Emails bounced back. Phone calls rang to voicemail. Even my godmother, Ruth, who used to send me birthday cards with $50 bills tucked inside, told me not to contact her again. "I don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she said, voice shaking, "but I can't be part of it." I sat on the kitchen floor that night and didn't cry. I wanted to. God, I wanted to, but I couldn't. It was like my body had locked itself down. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of the town pressing in around me. This place wasn't just rejecting me, it was erasing me, piece by piece, and yet I couldn't leave. I wanted to. I should have. But something in me clenched tighter with every lie, every vandalized wall, every cowardly whisper. I didn't know who had started it, not exactly, but I had a feeling. Claire Manning. And if she was behind this, if she had poisoned this town against me with that fake smile and polished voice, then she'd made one fatal mistake. She'd underestimated what was left of me. She thought I was broken, but I wasn't. I was changing. And the woman I was becoming, the one who would rise from the ashes of this quiet massacre, was someone she should fear, because I was no longer just trying to survive. Now I wanted the truth, and I wanted revenge. I didn't see it coming. That's what hurts the most. Claire and I used to share everything: diary pages, heartbreaks, whispered dreams after midnight. We were the kind of friends who talked about the future like we were already living it. I thought we'd grow old as sisters. Turns out I didn't know her at all. After the warrant, after the article, I started digging. Not into rumors, into facts. First stop, the town courthouse. Public records section. It was there I found the paper trail, innocuous at first. Claire had purchased property on the edge of town, a large tract of land that used to belong to the community college before it was quietly sold. There was no press, no announcement, just signatures, notarizations, and a transfer of ownership to a company I didn't recognize, Elmcroft Holdings, LLC. That name appeared again in a donation ledger I found online for the town's annual gala, and again in the minutes from a zoning board meeting buried in the archives. Elmcroft Holdings was trying to push through a development project, luxury apartments, retail spaces, and ironically, a civic enrichment center, all spearheaded by Claire's husband, Senator Matthew Reeves. A vision for a better town, they called it. Better, of course, meaning less like the people who'd lived there all their lives and more like the people Claire wanted to attract. The pieces clicked into place like bullets in a chamber. My family's property, the Whitmore House, was right in the center of the proposed expansion zone. Claire didn't just want to destroy me, she wanted my land. And she wasn't working alone. I kept reading. The town's mayor, the zoning board, the head of the planning commission, every single one of them had some financial connection to Elmcroft Holdings. It was all there, buried in disclosures, masked by legal entities and PACs. But I saw it. What chilled me wasn't the corruption. It was how quietly and thoroughly they had removed any obstacles in their way. They hadn't just started with me. There was Michael Day, an ex-councilman who disappeared after his home mysteriously burned down last year, ruled accidental. But Michael had once been one of the loudest voices against the rezoning plan. There was June Lyle, a librarian who suddenly retired after a whisper campaign accused her of embezzlement. Charges were never filed. Her house went on the market a week later, sold undervalued to Elmcroft Holdings. And now, me. The pattern was clear. Target, isolate, discredit, acquire. But none of it made sense, not until I came across one final piece. A deed, dated 18 months ago, signed by my Aunt Helen. Transferring interim custodianship of the Whitmore House to Claire Manning in the event of my legal incapacitation or disrepute. I stared at the paper until my vision blurred. It was dated 6 months before Aunt Helen died. I remember visiting her around that time. She was confused. Her memory was slipping. She couldn't remember what day it was. I found her trying to cook spaghetti with canned peaches. And Claire had been helping her, picking up groceries, driving her to appointments, making herself indispensable. I felt sick. She'd manipulated Helen, used her mental decline to plant a legal seed. A seed that would grow into a claim against the house the moment my reputation crumbled. The kitchen window, the fake drug tip, the rumors. It wasn't just vengeance, it was strategy. Claire had always been brilliant. She could weaponize charm like no one I'd ever known. In college, she talked her way into exclusive internships with a single phone call. Professors adored her. She knew how to make you trust her and then gut you with a smile. And the others, Sheriff Harlow, Mayor Lanton, the school board, even Ruth. They weren't just bystanders. They were shareholders in a fantasy she was building, one that didn't include people like me. The town had become her chessboard, and I was a piece she no longer needed. But what Claire didn't understand, what she would never understand, is that when you back someone into a corner, when you strip away everything they have and everything they thought was safe, You don't break them, you forge them. The world she built was made of paper. Thin, flammable, smug, and now I had the match. But I needed help, a lifeline, someone who hadn't already been compromised or bought. I didn't trust many people, but there was one name that kept coming to mind. Someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade, Jonah Wells. He used to be the editor of the town paper. He left after a dispute with the mayor about editorial integrity. His words. He now ran a small digital blog for retired journalists and whistleblowers. Last I heard, he lived in a cabin outside Allegheny. I found his contact info buried in an old email chain. When I called, I didn't expect him to answer, but he did. And when I told him what was happening, there was a long pause. Then he said, "Come tomorrow, bring everything." That night, I packed up the deed, the zoning documents, the minutes, and a flash drive with every connection I'd mapped. I tucked it all into a folder and slid it under my pillow. Then I locked every door, blocked every window, and sat in the dark with a bat across my knees. I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had changed. I was no longer the ghost in this story. I was the reckoning. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into Jonah Wells's gravel driveway was the satellite dish. Old, cracked, barely clinging to the side of his roof like a relic from the Cold War. The second thing I noticed was the man himself. He looked older than I remembered. His once black beard had faded into a peppery mess, and his eyes, though sharp, were ringed with exhaustion. He opened the door slowly, peering out like someone who'd spent too much time expecting bad news. "You brought the folder?" he asked. I nodded. We didn't say much as he led me inside. His home was cluttered but clean. Stacks of magazines, folders, hard drives. A man who never stopped working, even if no one was listening anymore. He poured me coffee, black, bitter, the kind that makes you feel every mistake you've ever made, and I handed over the folder. He read in silence, page after page. His mouth tightened as he pieced it together. After almost an hour, he leaned back and exhaled a curse. "Jesus, Caroline, this is big, bigger than I thought." "I know," I whispered. He rubbed his eyes and looked at me like he was trying to see if I was still the same girl who used to leave poetry clippings in the paper's suggestion box. "You need to understand something," he said. "Once this goes public, once you start shaking cages like these, there's no walking it back. These people, they play dirty, and they don't lose." I met his eyes. They already took everything. There's nothing left to lose. That wasn't entirely true. There was always more to lose. And over the next few weeks, I would learn just how deep that well of pain could go. Because hitting rock bottom, I would find out, doesn't mean there isn't still another floor beneath it. It started the day after I left Jonah's place. My bank accounts, both personal and the small inheritance fund my parents had left me, were frozen. "Suspicious activity," the email read. When I called, I was placed on hold for 2 hours before being told the matter was under legal review. They wouldn't say more. The same day, my phone line went dead. No service. The carrier claimed I'd missed a series of payments. Payments I knew had been made. Then the mail stopped coming. Literally, no bills, no letters, not even junk flyers. When I asked the post office, the clerk squinted and told me the address had been flagged as inactive. I was being erased, deliberately, systematically. Jonah called me that night. "They've lawyered up," he said. "Got a firm out of Harrisburg, high-priced, brutal." "For what?" I asked, breath catching in my throat. "Defamation. They're claiming you're spreading false information." "That the documents were forged? Claire herself filed the complaint?" I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just escaped. A hollow, stunned kind of laugh that didn't reach my eyes. She's suing me for telling the truth? That's how they do it. Bury you in paperwork. Keep you tied up so long you run out of money or fight. Let them come, I said, though my voice trembled. But bravado doesn't feed you. It doesn't warm a cold house or pay property taxes. 2 weeks after the defamation suit was filed, the electric company shut off my power. The grocery store stopped accepting my debit card. I became a ghost in my own life. And no one, not a single person from this town, from my past, from my supposed network of educated, well-connected former colleagues, stood up for me. The silence was the loudest betrayal of all. One night, I walked to Finch's just to feel human for an hour. I sat in the far corner, nursing a coffee I paid for in loose change. Across the room, I saw her, Claire, laughing with a small circle of men in suits. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her voice cut through the room like music at a wake. She saw me. I know she did. And she smiled. Not a cruel smile, not even smug. It was worse than that. It was pitying, like I was already dead. That's when the final flaw gave out. Because later that night, after I walked the 5 miles home, my shoes soaked, my bones aching, I saw something waiting for me on the front porch. A manila envelope. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them, all of me, walking to the store, taking out trash, sitting on the porch in my robe. They weren't taken from a distance. These weren't paparazzi shots. They were intimate, up close, personal. Somebody had been watching me closely, and then I saw the last photo. It wasn't of me. It was of Jonah getting into his car. The message was clear. They weren't just coming for me. They were coming for anyone who helped me. I called him immediately. Don't come here, I told him. What? Don't call me. Don't answer emails from me. Don't be seen with me. You're not safe. He cursed under his breath, but he didn't argue. He understood. We both did. This wasn't just about land anymore, or money. This was a war, and wars don't ask for permission. They only ask, how much are you willing to lose? That night, I lit a candle because I had no electricity. I sat in the silence and wrote a letter to myself. It read, they think they've buried you, but you are seed, you will rise. The day I decided to stop surviving and start fighting was the day the house almost burned down. It was just after 3 a.m. when I smelled smoke. Not the heavy, suffocating kind, but something faint, like a warning. I stumbled through the dark, barefoot and disoriented until I found it, the front porch smoldering. Someone had lit a rag, stuffed it under the boards, and fled. If I'd slept another 15 minutes, the entire house might have gone up in flames. The fire department came. Sheriff Harlow did not. I filed a report. They gave me a form, asked a few indifferent questions, and left before the sun came up. No fingerprints, no follow-up. Just another page in a folder labeled Unsolved. I stood there in the ash and cold, watching smoke curl into the sky. That was the moment something snapped inside me. Whatever part of me still hoped that justice would come knocking on my door, that part died on that porch. So I made a choice. No more waiting, no more asking. No more being careful. It was time to become someone else. I disappeared for 5 days. Not completely, but just enough to make them nervous. I drove west, across the state, into a corner of Pittsburgh where no one knew my name. I used a burner phone, slept in my car, ate gas station sandwiches, and memorized maps by the light of a dying flashlight, and I made connections. I found a small group, activists, whistleblowers, hackers, people who existed in the cracks between systems. They didn't trust me at first. Why would they? I was a woman with a broken reputation and a face that had graced too many local headlines. But I had something they respected more than credibility. I had evidence, not just documents anymore, proof. See, before I left, I'd started noticing patterns. Anonymous accounts posting my location, my power company logging shut-offs during weekends, my bank accounts freezing for unusual activity just hours after I accessed them. I hadn't just been targeted, I'd been digitally profiled, tracked, and isolated. I needed people who could fight that kind of war, and I found them. There was Theo, a soft-spoken genius with a limp and a laptop older than God. He read my files like he was studying a sacred text. "Your town," he said quietly, "is running a multi-tiered surveillance net. Not legal. Not even close." Next was V, short for Veronica, a social engineer who could get someone to hand over their social security number in 5 minutes flat. She'd worked corporate before she went rogue. Said she liked the challenge better on the outside. And finally, there was Elias. I never asked what Elias used to do, but the way he moved, slow, watchful, calculating, it told me enough. He didn't flinch at the photos of my porch. He didn't blink when I told him about the manila envelope. He just said, "Tell me who you want to ruin." I didn't say Claire's name. I didn't need to. I spent the next 4 weeks learning everything I could from them: how to trace shell companies, how to spoof email headers, how to gather metadata from the files they thought I'd deleted. I became a different woman, not someone new, but someone distilled, sharpened. Every fear I'd carried, the humiliation, the loneliness, the betrayal, it all became fuel. I created new identities, not fake, just faceless. I posed as a real estate investor interested in Elmcroft Holdings, got a Zoom call with one of their regional directors, recorded the whole thing. He bragged on camera about how we cleared out some local dead weight. I signed up for a private server Claire's husband used for campaign communications. With Theo's help, I decrypted weeks' worth of messages between him and the mayor, budget proposals, land deals, illegal funding routes. And then there was the crown jewel. An audio file V recovered from an intercepted voice message. It was Claire, her voice unmistakable. Cool, professional, she said. "If Caroline doesn't sign over the deed by Christmas, make sure something unfortunate happens. I want her out, by any means necessary." I played that clip 5 times, and then I sat very still. This wasn't just politics, it was intent, and now I had the proof, but evidence wasn't enough. I didn't want justice in a courtroom where the rules were written by people like her. I wanted her to feel what I felt, alone, doubted, unseen. I returned to the town 2 days before Thanksgiving. No announcements, no calls, just me and a duffel bag full of digital weapons. My appearance had changed, hair shorter, glasses, the weight of my body rearranged by weeks of sleepless nights and relentless focus. People didn't recognize me right away, that was the point. I moved through town like a ghost, attended a city council meeting, sat in the back, listened to Claire talk about unity and modernization. She looked powerful, poised, and so very smug. I watched her sip from her crystal water bottle and make jokes about small-town charm, and I smiled because I knew something she didn't. The clock was already ticking. Elias had started dripping the files, not all at once. That would have been mercy. No, we did it slowly. A journalist in Harrisburg received the first batch, forged emails, the zoning scam. 2 days later, a leaked recording hit a local blog. Claire discussing which families she wanted relocated. Within a week, a subreddit popped up, the Elmcroft Conspiracy. Posts exploded. Anonymous sources, mostly fake, claimed to have inside knowledge. Theo and V fueled the fire with bot accounts and well-timed disclosures. And then, just before the town's tree lighting ceremony, a video surfaced. Claire. Talking about me, laughing. "If we play this right," she said on the recording, "she'll either vanish or crack. Either way, the house is ours." That was the match, the flame, and the blaze was only beginning. I returned to the town like a rumor. No announcement, no parade, just a whisper that drifted between coffee shop booths and town hall corridors. "Caroline Whitmore's back? Thought she left for good. Isn't she, unstable?" That word. Unstable. They tossed it around like a weapon dipped in sugar. It had become my label, my curse, my exile. But now it was my shield, because while they watched for a woman unraveling at the seams, they didn't notice the one standing still in the shadows, stitching herself back together with surgical precision. I rented a small room above an antique bookstore run by a widowed woman named Margot, who cared more about Dickens and peppermint schnapps than town politics. I paid in cash. I used a name no one here would recognize, Rachel Ellis, and when I spoke, I softened my voice, wore thrift store coats, kept my hair tucked into a knit cap. No one looked twice. That anonymity became my weapon. From that tiny, creaky room above the bookstore, I orchestrated a quiet revolution. Every morning, I took my coffee on the park bench outside City Hall. I watched the players take their positions, Mayor Lanton with his polished shoes and forced smile, Sheriff Harlow puffing his chest in uniform that barely fit him now, and Claire, always Claire, dressed in whites and creams like she was immune to guilt. But I wasn't there to confront her. Not yet. I was there to observe, to listen, to collect. Each day I added another piece to my puzzle. I learned where Claire got her hair done, Sal's on Main. I watched her. She met her husband outside the Bellevue Cafe every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. sharp, always seated at the table near the window, always a kale Caesar and a glass of white wine. I knew where she parked her car, where she liked to jog, the exact hour she picked up her dry cleaning. It wasn't obsession, it was strategy. She had turned my life into a public exhibit. I would turn hers into a case study. Jonah stayed in touch discreetly. His blog had become a quiet wildfire, passed from inbox to inbox. Each week he published a new post, posing as an anonymous whistleblower, leaking pieces of the corruption puzzle. We watched the town split in two, those who clung to Claire's version of events and those beginning to question what had once seemed unshakable. And then came the first real break. It was a cold, brittle afternoon. I was sitting in the back of a council meeting when I noticed Claire arguing with a man I hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, expensive coat, New York swagger. He didn't belong here. That night, Theo confirmed it. His name was Richard Kane, a regional auditor who'd been sent to review misappropriated redevelopment funds connected to Elmcroft Holdings. The firestorm we'd started was drawing federal eyes. Claire didn't know it yet, but her circle was shrinking. And people inside it, they were getting nervous. 3 days later, I got a message through a secure line V had set up. A city clerk wanted to meet. Her name was Ashley Dean. Early 30s, single mum, been working for the town since she was 19. We met at a diner 2 towns over. She was shaking before she even sat down. "They're going to pin it on me," she whispered, fingers tight around her mug. I processed the permits, the contracts. I didn't know what I was signing. They told me it was standard. Claire said it was just paperwork. I let her talk. She told me everything. The fake charities used to shuffle funds, the hidden accounts, the pressure to backdate documents, the silence that was expected, demanded. They said if I went public, they'd take my son, she said. that I'd be arrested, that I'd lose everything. I reached across the table, my voice soft but steady. You're not alone anymore. Ashley agreed to give us copies, emails, invoices. One in particular stood out, a chain between Claire and Senator Reeves discussing the urgent need to acquire the Whitmore property before Q1. I felt the blood leave my hands, my name, my home, right there in cold, sterile font. She'd reduced my life to a square on a development spreadsheet. It wasn't personal to her, it was business, but to me, it was war. Still, I waited. The worst thing I could do was rush the final act. The trap was almost ready. I just needed one more thread, and I got it. From Mason. Yes, that Mason. Claire's younger brother. The boy who once chased me with a dead frog in 4th grade and spent his summers building tree forts with me in the woods behind my house. He'd grown into a man I barely recognized, tall, careful, haunted. He found me in the bookstore one morning. Didn't say hello, just whispered, "Meet me behind St. Luke's, midnight," then walked away. When I arrived, the church bells had just finished their last chime. Mason was there, pacing, clutching a folder like it might explode in his hands. "She doesn't know I'm doing this," he said, "but she's gone too far." He handed me the folder. Inside, floor plans for a private facility Claire and Reeves had funded, a rehab center built with town money but owned by a private subsidiary, staffed with unlicensed professionals, used to warehouse problem citizens. One of those citizens? Michael Day, the councilman who supposedly left town after his house fire. He'd never left. They'd locked him away to silence him. I felt the air drain from my lungs. This wasn't corruption. This was cruelty, calculated, cold-blooded. Sanitized with white paper and black ink. I looked up at Mason. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I reached into my coat and handed him a second folder, everything we had collected, everything we were about to release. "This is going public," I said, "tomorrow." Mason nodded. And for a moment, there in the moonlight behind the church, where we used to sing carols as children, I saw the boy he used to be, and I saw his shame, but also his courage. We parted without words, because we knew. The endgame had begun, and by the time the sun rose, the world would no longer see Claire Manning as a civic leader in cream suits and polite smiles. They would see her for what she truly was, and they would never look away again. They say the truth comes like thunder, loud and sudden, but I've learned it's more like rain. It starts with a single drop, then another, then the sky breaks. The morning it all began, I sat at the town cafe, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug, watching the first storm clouds roll in, not in the sky, but across people's faces. The drop? Jonah's front page article revealed secret deals and silenced voices in Fairwood. It wasn't just text, it was an avalanche, screenshots of emails, wire transfers, audio files with dates and names, the photograph of Michael Day, pale and sunken, standing at the gates of the facility he was never supposed to leave. It hit the town like a bomb. By 9 a.m., the mayor cancelled his press briefing. By 11, 2 zoning board members resigned. By noon, the Elmcroft Holdings office had been vandalized, just smashed windows, and a painted phrase across the front door, "Where is the truth?" And Claire? Claire didn't flinch. Not yet. She hosted a luncheon that same day, smiling for the local paper, her arm looped through Senator Reeves like a well-staged political portrait. The headline read, "Claire Manning addresses community concerns with confidence." It was a bluff. But I was done playing checkers with someone who didn't know she was already in a chess endgame. The real strike would come that evening. I made sure of it, because that night Claire invited half the town's influencers, council members, business owners, old money families to her home for a unity dinner to reassure them, to spin it, to seize control. But I had another plan. I didn't need a courtroom. I needed a living room, one where she felt safe, powerful, one where she'd reveal herself. And fate gave me an opening I couldn't have scripted better. Claire's assistant, Nina, resigned that morning after the article dropped, packed up her desk, walked out of the Elmcroft office, and texted me 3 words: "I'm in tonight." At 7 p.m, Claire's estate on Laurel Hill glowed like a cathedral, valets lining the driveway, string lights wrapped around trees, music drifting out through arched windows. Inside, the smell of rosemary lamb and red wine masked the rot. I wasn't there. Not physically, but Nina was. And so was a small pin-sized microphone tucked into the seam of her scarf, broadcasting everything to a remote drive Theo had set up. I sat across town, headphones in, listening, waiting. Claire started with charm, as always, a few self-deprecating jokes, a nod to the sensationalist media, a carefully curated expression of concern for transparency. But as the night wore on, the wine loosened tongues, especially hers. At 9:13 p.m, someone asked, too casually, about Michael Day. Claire laughed. He was a liability. We moved him somewhere safe. He's fine. The room went quiet. Then she added, "People like that, you can't give them too much rope. They start hanging everyone else." I hit record. At 9:27 p.m, she turned to Senator Reeves and said, "We need to control the narrative by next week. The Whitmore woman's probably holed up somewhere writing a memoir. Don't worry, she'll crack." "She always does." Another voice, maybe the mayor's, chuckled, "She might sue." Claire's reply, crystal clear. "She won't get that far. If she does, we'll bury her again." There it was. Intent, malice, precedent, all served between course 5 and dessert. At 10:01, Nina excused herself to the bathroom and slipped out the back door. I was waiting in my car 3 blocks down. She climbed in, her hand shaking. "Got it?" I asked. She nodded, eyes wide. "It's worse than you think." "I know," I said. We uploaded the audio to Jonah's secure server and embedded the quotes into a new article. This time paired with body cam footage Ashley Dean had retrieved from a locked archive in City Hall. The footage showed Sheriff Harlow ignoring a domestic violence call. The audio, Claire telling him to prioritize more valuable properties. By dawn, the story had gone national. CNN, BuzzFeed, local radio hosts, Reddit threads exploding. Ellis Fairwood fraud trended for 16 hours, and Claire? She was no longer smiling. At noon the next day, I walked into City Hall. Not hidden, not disguised, just me. Every head turned, every whisper sharpened. And when I reached the reception desk, I looked the clerk in the eye and said, "I'm here to see the council." The room buzzed. Security was called. Reporters arrived. I waited. When the doors opened, Claire was already inside, perfectly styled, flanked by Reeves and Sheriff Harlow. The tension in the room was a held breath, until I let it go. I stepped forward, thumb drive in hand, and spoke. "My name is Caroline Whitmore. I've lived in this town longer than most of you. You've called me a fraud, a liar, a threat." I paused, "And now I'm here to return the favor with evidence." I slid the drive across the table. "Play it." The judge presiding over the emergency council hearing inserted it into the laptop, and then her voice filled the chamber. Cold, clear, caught every lie, every calculated threat, every admission. Claire's face turned to stone. Reeves stood up, knocked over his water. Harlow tried to object, but the room wasn't theirs anymore. The room belonged to the truth. And as I turned to walk out, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and I said nothing because this moment, this wasn't about victory, it was about clarity. And sometimes the loudest statement is silence. When the video ended, the silence in the council chamber was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't quiet, it was stunned. It was the silence of unraveling power, of oxygen being sucked out of a room full of people who had just realized the emperor wasn't only naked, she'd been sharpening knives behind their backs the entire time. Claire didn't move, not right away. Her hands stayed folded in her lap like they were welded together. Her face, always so perfectly composed, cracked just slightly around the eyes. Senator Reeves was the first to speak, or rather, to shout. "This is entrapment. This is a smear campaign." The presiding council chair, a man who once complimented my mother's meatloaf at a church picnic and never spoke above a whisper, slammed his gavel down so hard I thought the wood might splinter. "Sit down, Senator." He did, and then the tide turned. The district attorney's office announced an emergency review. An independent ethics committee declared an inquiry, and within 36 hours, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office had issued subpoenas to every sitting member of the Fairwood Council, as well as Claire, Reeves, Sheriff Harlow, and the Elmcroft Holdings Executive Board. The news ran in a constant loop. Small town, a big lies, the Caroline Whitmore scandal exposed as targeted corruption. I watched it all unfold from the window of the bookstore apartment. Not smug, not gleeful, just still. Because while the world was catching up to the truth, I was already mourning what it had cost to get here. My name was cleared publicly, but there was no ceremony, no parade. No one knocked on my door with a bouquet and said, "We're sorry." Redemption isn't a party, it's a reckoning. Still, they tried. Ashley came by first. She brought a pie, blueberry, still warm. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "and I wanted to say I'm sorry." I nodded. She didn't need to say more. Then came Mason. He stood outside the door for almost 10 minutes before knocking. When I opened it, he looked like a boy again, shoulders curled inward, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't know everything," he said. "But you knew enough," I replied gently. He looked down. "I never wanted this to happen to you." "I know," I said, "and I believe you." He didn't try to hug me, didn't ask for forgiveness, just sat on the steps with me for half an hour while we listened to the wind, both of us too tired for anger, too wounded for nostalgia. Others followed. The barista who used to avoid eye contact handed me my coffee with a trembling, "I'm sorry for judging." My old neighbor left a tin of cookies on the porch with a note that simply said, "I was wrong." Even Ruth called. That surprised me the most. "I should have known better," she said, voice cracked like old paper. "Your mother would have fought like hell for you." I swallowed hard, pressing the phone against my cheek. "I didn't need a fight," I said. "I just needed someone to stand with me." But not everyone regretted what they did. Claire refused to speak publicly. Her attorney issued a generic statement about misunderstandings and politically motivated distortions. She didn't show up for the next hearing, neither did Reeves. But I knew where she was. It was a week after the storm broke when I saw her again. I had gone to the cemetery to leave flowers on my parents' grave. A simple ritual I'd avoided since returning because grief had felt too soft for the war I was in. But now I needed softness, and that's when I saw her, Claire, standing beneath the sycamore tree, dressed in black, sunglasses on despite the grey sky. For a moment we just stared at each other, two women who had once shared childhood secrets and now carried mutual scars. I didn't approach her, but she did something I didn't expect. She took off her glasses. Her eyes were swollen. Red. "I didn't think you'd win," she said, not defiant, not cruel, just numb. I tilted my head. "I didn't think you'd need to destroy me," I replied. She swallowed. "I wanted the land." "I was never just the land," I said. "No," she admitted, "but it was easier to pretend you were." That was the real confession, not the fraud, not the conspiracy, but the way people simplify each other to justify cruelty. She looked at me one last time and said, "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said, because I'm not giving it. And then I walked away, not out of hate, but because closure doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means leaving someone behind for good. That night, Jonah called. "Feds want to interview you. Might be called to testify." "Will they charge her?" I asked. "Eventually, but they're slow. You might be old and grey by the time anything sticks." I laughed for the first time in days. "Then I'll make sure my story's written in stone." He paused. "It already is." I hung up and stood at the window, watching the town below. It hadn't changed, but I had, because now the world saw me, not as unstable, not as angry, but as a woman who had survived the worst kind of betrayal and never stopped telling the truth. And that was a story worth remembering. The day the town truly changed was quieter than I imagined. There were no protests, no tearful confrontations, no screaming matches on courthouse steps, just doors closing, fast. Senator Reeves officially stepped down the following Monday. His statement was read through a clenched-jawed aide in a nearly empty press room. "For the good of the state and the people I serve, I will no longer be seeking re-election. No apology, no remorse, just the crumbling of a carefully crafted mask." Sheriff Harlow followed 2 days later. Rumors swirled of an internal investigation, a sealed indictment, whispered threats of pension loss if he didn't cooperate. He left town in the middle of the night, according to a friend of Margot's, taking only his fishing gear and a box of sensitive documents. I didn't care what was in the box. Let the system pick his bones clean, but the one that hit hardest? Claire. She held on. For almost a month after the story broke, she kept up appearances. She attended charity events, took filtered photos on social media, even posted a video of herself volunteering at a food bank. But the internet doesn't forget. And neither do small towns. Her sponsors pulled out, her reputation tanked, donors vanished. Her real estate project was indefinitely postponed pending legal clarification. Then the dam burst. Nina leaked everything. Bank records, meeting transcripts, private voicemails. One in particular went viral. Claire's voice brittle with rage. "If Caroline Whitmore shows her face again, I want her erased. Do you hear me? Erased." The backlash was immediate. Articles poured in. Op-eds titled things like "The Making and Unmaking of Claire Manning." Cable news anchors dissected her downfall with smug expressions and catchy transitions. But the most surprising reaction came from within Fairwood itself. People who had ignored me, mocked me, feared me, they started talking. Ashley was invited to speak at a local university about government transparency. Michael Day's reinstatement was announced by the new interim mayor, a woman named Judith who once told me to smile more. Even the bookstore, sweet, dusty Margot's Haven, started hosting weekly forums on civic responsibility. I didn't attend. I wasn't interested in handshakes or headlines, but I did receive letters, hundreds. From strangers, from veterans, from women who'd been gaslit, ostracized, discarded. One letter read, "You showed me that survival isn't enough. You made me believe in reclaiming myself." Another, scrawled in tight cursive, "My daughter watches your interviews on loop. She calls you the woman who made silence loud." I kept them in a box under my bed. Every now and then, when the nights felt too long, I'd open it and read until the ache in my chest softened, but not all the letters were from strangers. One came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no signature, just a single page. I was wrong about you, about everything. I don't expect redemption. I just hope one day you can look back at our childhood and know not all of it was a lie. M. Mason. I read that note 20 times before folding it neatly and placing it next to my father's old compass on the mantel. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, he hadn't claimed he'd done enough, but he'd done something the others hadn't, he'd faced it. And that mattered. The town itself began reshaping. Small things first. The council voted to deconstruct Claire's pet project, the Civic Enrichment Centre, and reinvest the funds into housing, mental health services, and a real veterans outreach centre. Michael Day led the first planning session. I watched from a distance. He saw me and nodded. That was enough. Claire, she moved out of her Laurel Hill estate 2 weeks later, sold it off quietly, moved into a smaller home in a neighbouring county. Her husband filed for divorce shortly after. I heard rumours she was in therapy, rumours that she had taken to drinking too much wine at noon. I didn't rejoice, I didn't pity, but I understood something others missed. She wasn't just being punished, she was unravelling. Because power, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself in silence. It echoes, it haunts. And Claire? She was finally haunted by herself, and that was a kind of justice no judge could deliver. One afternoon, I saw her again, at the edge of a grocery store parking lot. We locked eyes from a distance. She looked older, not in years, in weight, in wear. She turned away first. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That moment belonged to me, not because I'd won, but because I was still standing. I returned to the Monterey house after the frost melted and the sea mist carried the scent of the old pines again. The garden had grown wild in my absence, as if the roots had been holding their breath, waiting for me to return. I didn't tame it. I let it grow. Because some things need to bloom on their own, in their own wild, unapologetic way, just like me. I planted a new rose bush at the center of the yard, deep crimson, and I named it Resilience because revenge is temporary. But growth, that's forever. I always thought revenge would taste sweet, like cold champagne on a summer night, or justice served on a silver platter, neat, clear, satisfying. But when it finally came, when the last stone was turned and every name was exposed, it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like salt, like the ocean wind through the cracked windows of the Monterey house, like grief, like endings. Because no matter how many headlines were written, no matter how many people finally believed me, nothing could rewind the years I lost. The nights I slept on hardwood floors, terrified of my own shadow. The months I carried shame that didn't belong to me. The people I buried in silence because I didn't know if they would survive standing beside me. Those losses don't come back. They don't fade with the news cycle. But something else grew in their place, something stronger. Peace, not the kind that comes with justice in a courtroom or applause from a crowd. No, the quiet kind, the kind that wraps around your shoulders at sunset when the garden is still damp from the rain and your coffee's gone cold in your hand, but you don't care. The kind that feels like truth and freedom and something like forgiveness, not for them, but for yourself. Forgiveness for surviving, for staying quiet too long, for losing your way and then clawing back without knowing if you'd find anything waiting. I didn't rebuild my life the way I thought I would. There were no big returns, no book deals, no political runs, I kept things simple. I turned the Monterey house into a refuge for me, for others. Sometimes it's women who show up, eyes hollow, clutching court orders and hope that flickers like a dying match. Sometimes it's veterans. And men who can't sleep, women who've forgotten how to trust their own reflection. I don't ask for their stories, I just offer them a place to sit, a place to breathe. We plant things together, lavender, rosemary, roses that bloom late in the season, stubborn as hell and twice as beautiful. We build something out of the silence, not justice, not revenge, but healing. Mason visits every few weeks. He never stays long and he still struggles to meet my eyes. But he brings books sometimes, new seeds. A little hope, that's enough. He's not the boy he was, and I'm no longer the girl who left this town believing she could outrun every ghost. We meet in the middle now, in the quiet. Claire sent a letter. I didn't expect it, didn't ask for it. It came in a plain envelope with no return address, scrawled in that tight, careful script I recognized from every high school note we used to pass under desks. She said she had lost everything, her home, her marriage, her standing, and that it had forced her to look in a mirror and finally, painfully, see herself clearly. She said I didn't owe her forgiveness, but she hoped one day I'd understand why she became the woman she did. I didn't write back, not because I'm cruel, but because some apologies are meant to float into the ether, left unreturned, like petals in the tide. I don't think about her much anymore, and when I do, I feel nothing. Not hate, not anger, just space. That too is freedom. Some evenings, I sit on the porch wrapped in a worn blanket, watching the sea stretch endlessly into the horizon. The wind carries stories here, ones not even the tide can bury, and in those moments, I remember who I was, who they tried to erase, and who I became in spite of them. I'm not a symbol, I'm not a survivor for hire or a cautionary tale. I'm just a woman, with hands in the soil, with scars that no longer demand explanation, with peace that I built myself, breath by breath. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I hope you understand something. You don't need a courtroom to reclaim your voice. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need to be understood by the world to be whole again. You only need to keep going, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming everything they tried to keep you from being: free, alive, unbreakable. This is my story, but it might be yours too. And if it is, I hope you carry it with you like a lighthouse, for the days when the sky darkens, for the nights when silence grows heavy, for the long, quiet road back to yourself, because you deserve to come home just like I did, and you will.